The following is a presentation of the Eagles Sports Network.
We welcome you inside episode 3 of Mossy Creek Conversations. Hello, everyone. I'm the voice of the Eagles, Adam Cavalier. Pleased to welcome in former Carson-Newman play-by-play voice and current voice of the Thundering Herd, Steve Cotton. Steve, thanks so much for taking some time out of your preparations. We're shooting this on a Friday. You've got App State on CBS on Saturday, and this will drop on the Wednesday following that game, just for the sense of time. But thanks so much for taking some time out of your week to join us here and reminisce about your time on the banks of Mossy Creek.
Well, sure thing. And anytime I get to think back and talk about those years, I was there from 1987 into 1991. Great memories. Stan Cotton, my predecessor, both at Carson-Newman, or worked with him at Carson-Newman, and then also here at Marshall, and I still talk a couple of times a week, and we have a lot of laughs when we think back about those days.
The over-under on the times that you and I confuse Marshall and Carson-Newman and use them interchangeably, I'm going to set at 5, as it seems to be when we get together. Me and Marshall, you.
Have I already done that?
No, not yet. But but it seems like anytime you and I get together and start talking, it invariably happens. So this is going to be a little bit different from our typical podcast. We'll touch on obviously some Carson-Newman stuff, but Steve and I might get down some broadcast preparation paths as well. You look back at your time at Carson-Newman, and I think you had about as good of a start calling games as anybody could ask for. You show up in 87, and the first football game out of the gate is number 1 Carson-Newman versus number 2 Hillsdale. At the time, did you have any appreciation for what you were coming into?
I had enough of an appreciation, and that has certainly grown over time, and I realized that that was an opportunity that very few people would ever get in this industry. I had enough of a grasp, though, to be terrified because I had come up with the idea as I went to the University of Florida, and as a graduate there, that I would be a baseball broadcaster. That was my goal. That was my whole plan. And it didn't happen. I ended up through, some people would say dumb luck. I prefer divine appointments along the way at Carson-Newman. And here I am, never having been, not only not having called a football game, but really not having been involved in any kind of a radio broadcast on the football side, more than maybe, I think one time just to get a glimpse. I sat in the radio booth for the University of Florida broadcast for maybe a half. And so I did not have really the first idea about how to prepare for a football broadcast. So I leaned heavily on Stan Cotton. No relation, but we, like I said, keep in touch with one another regularly, and his daughters call me uncle, and so we really confuse people as to whether or not we are related. But I relied on him to give me some pointers. But in those days, Carson-Newman football was obviously the king of the hill in the NAIA, and was winning so much and was popular enough that the home games were typically televised. And so Stan did the TV play-by-play for those, and I was the play-by-play guy on the radio side. And then for the few home games that were not televised, and then the road games, I did color along with Stan. So here I am calling number 1 and against number 2, breaking in a color analyst, Brad Spivey, a former player who was on the air for the first time in any capacity. And, Stan had commandeered the guy who was his spotter for the broadcast, the guy who helps out and is an extra set of eyes for those who have not been behind that curtain to see how it goes. You have someone who points out who made tackles, or just helps out and lets you have more information in your broadcast, because the play-by-play guy can only be looking at so many things at once. So he had commented. So I had a spotter who'd never done anything like that before. And we were hanging on for dear life. it was a very good game. There was I think the only touchdown came on a screen pass, Edwin Lowry to Pat Johnson. I think it ended up being a 25 or 30-yard play. Carson-Newman beat Hillsdale 10-3. I do remember that much of it clearly. And I think that tape exists somewhere, but when I find it, I'm going to burn it because I'm sure it was horrendous as far as a technical radio broadcast. I was off and running and had the bug. I realized what a gift it was, what a privilege to be able to call a game of that magnitude. And boy, that was the start of some fun times.
Now, when I texted you about coming on this, your memory was on the nose. I had to go back. We went back to the media guide, and you nailed it to the play, and you nailed the score. So you haven't had your recollection of it was true to form before you even knew that you were coming on this podcast. How much of your time here does stick in your mind after, I hate to do this to you, 3 decades in the industry?
Well, it's helped out. A lot of it does. But that is helped out by what we already talked about, that Stan and I talk and reminisce. And we have combined memories of Marshall together.
Yeah.
And I have, over the years, more several years ago than recently, but I used to go down and help Stan with Wake Forest baseball broadcasts after the Marshall season was wrapped up. Wake Forest, late 90s, early 2000s, was a perennial ACC baseball powerhouse, would go deep into the NCAA tournament even. So I would go down and help him on those broadcasts. So there are a lot of things that we have in common to go back and talk about, but we always end up at Mossy Creek and talking about the personalities. And as you go longer and longer in this business, it is about the people. You figure out more than about the score or anything like that. But we talk so much about it that those things still feel like they were yesterday.
I think about your debut seasons, I guess we'll call it, with Carson-Newman and then with Marshall. Your first year as the lead guy with the Herd was in 96. And that team, if I'm remembering right, had 15 NFL players, which is just unheard of for a 1AA team. Your 87 team at Carson-Newman had a half dozen. Did you have a level of appreciation, I guess, with what you were seeing, that there were some guys who were going to go play at the next level?
I did, and jump back to my undergrad days at the University of Florida. I'd seen, obviously, a whole lot of NFL caliber players, not only on the Gators, but it was the days of Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders, and every week, I got to see Herschel Walker play. So I knew that guys like David Poole and Joe Fishback and on were that level of talent as well. And, maybe David Poole might not be Deion Sanders, but David Poole was better than most of the other defensive backs I saw week to week at the University of Florida, and Joe Fishback the same way. So I did have an idea now that number would happen. And then, like you talked about, 1996 at Marshall, the first time I ever said touchdown thundering Herd, the ball was in the hands of Randy Moss. So that was a good time to jump in. And boy, Cav, I got so spoiled at both of those places. My 4 years at Carson-Newman, 2 NAIA national championships in 1988 and 1989, a loss in the national championship game in 87 to Cameron University out in Lawton, Oklahoma. Now, that was a bad day. And then a semifinals loss to Central State of Ohio, the last football game I did at Carson-Newman. And then my first 4 years at Marshall, the team lost 4 total games, went 15-0, and won what we then called the 1AA national championship in 1996, made the move up to 1A, or now FBS, in 1997, and went to a bowl game that year and lost only 1 game in 98, and then in 1999 behind Chad Pennington, a first-round draft pick quarterback and a guy from Knoxville. Marshall went 13-0 and was ranked number 10 in the country. I thought this was going to be so easy. All you did was yell touchdown for the good guys and collect a bunch of championship rings. And turns out that now we've had many good years and many more good games than bad all along, but it doesn't quite go that easily most of the time.
It really was. I mean, that's an unreal 15-year start to your career, going up to 2002 with Byron Leftwich, with Marshall. But the other crazy thing to me about your start at Carson-Newman, we talk about Hillsdale and 1 versus 2, but then you get, I don't want to call it the emergence of Kenneth Tyson, because clearly he was a known commodity, but his senior year in 87 is something that is completely unmatched in the annals of all the all-time great Carson-Newman running backs, and that kind of burst onto the scene with Fairmont State when he has that 9-carry, 250-yard game. What do you remember about that one?
Well, when I arrived and first started thinking about those first few games at Carson-Newman, everybody told me about, oh, wait till you see Kenneth Tyson. This guy's unbelievable. And his first 3 years in uniform were national championships, 1983, 1984, and then he did not play. I think it was in 85, and then 86 came back and won another championship. So here we are. He's going into a senior season in 1987, 3 for 3 in terms of national championships when he's in uniform. And, heard all the stories about, as a freshman, he returned that kickoff for a touchdown at Mesa in the championship game and led to the upset there. And he was already a legend.
Yeah.
So here we are playing Hillsdale in the opener. And I'd been to some practices and that kind of thing. Didn't at that time realize how much I should go to practice, even more than I did. Hadn't yet learned how to prepare properly, but I'd seen enough of him. Yeah, that guy's pretty good. But again, I'm coming from watching Herschel Walker and Bo Jackson. So Kenneth was not nearly as big as those guys. He was fast and he had the moves, but I said, okay, well, we'll see what happens. And I do not recall how many yards he had in that Hillsdale game. I want to say probably 80 yards, something like that.
22 carries for 84 yards, Steve.
Okay. I did not look that up.
Oh, that's terrifying.
A good enough game, but, I said, well, so here we go. My first Carson-Newman road game, game 2 of the season, is at Fairmont State, which was, at the time, I believe, the first time I ever crossed the border into the state of West Virginia, where, lo and behold, I've been here for moving up on 30 years now. But we go to Fairmont, which was I believe ranked at that time, and had a good, solid team, certainly a favorite in the West Virginia Conference, and had a good program. Wally Hood was the coach, had been kind of a legendary guy there, and they had a very good running back named Don Overton, who was getting preseason accolades for, along with Kenneth Tyson, as one of the top running backs in the NAI that year. So it was a big deal. I went to Fairmont. And I want to say now you are I'm testing myself beyond maybe what I remember. I think Carson-Newman's first play, Tyson went close to 80 yards for a touchdown, maybe 78 yards or something like that.
78 yards, exactly, yes.
Okay, well, so, yeah. But then it just kept going on and on and on. Maybe the third touchdown and the fourth touchdown, something like that. He had runs of 60, 70 yards, something. And at halftime, he went in with 250 rushing yards already, which was at the time the Carson-Newman single game record on 9 carries. I did go back and look those numbers up, so that's not off the top of my head. Came out at halftime. We looked up, and the team came out of the locker room and was walking across this little field to get to the playing field at Fairmont State. And where's Tyson? Well, Tyson's already out of uniform. Coach Sparks knew that one was in the bag and was not going to risk him getting hurt just to build up numbers there, because up next was Elon, the team that Carson-Newman was fighting then to win the South Atlantic Conference, at that time the SAC 8, we called it championship, and he needed to be healthy, and he was healthy because he ran for 292 in a win over the Fighting Christians. So so after game one, I was still somewhat a skeptic about the greatness of Kenneth Tyson. A couple of weeks later, I knew that we were looking at something special, and he just kept racking up 150, 200-yard performances all year long.
I mean, you follow him too. Not just was Kenneth Tyson in the backfield. You had Vernon Turner, who went on for some time with the Rams, and then
Alvin Thomas was on that team. A great running back who later had is Marshall. Here, that was the first time.
Yes, I knew we knew it would happen. We knew it would happen.
As Carson-Newman made it to the playoffs, the Eagles kind of drew the short straw and were sent to play Central State University from Ohio in Dayton at Welcome Stadium at the University of Dayton, Wilberforce, Ohio, a few miles outside of Dayton, but they put that game at the UD campus. And Central State had just dropped down to the NAI from 1AA. They were a good team at the 1AA level. The NAI did not have scholarship limits. Now, the South Atlantic Conference did. I want to say it might have been 25 scholarships at the time. I may be a bit off on that. But Central State was loaded with D1 transfers and had 80 scholarships or something like that. And they had just blistered pretty much everybody. I think they had maybe one tie game that year with Florida A&M or something, which was a very good 1AA team at that point. And so that was just kind of crazy. NFL player Vince Buck was on that team, a defensive back, several year starter in the NFL. Eric Williams, maybe the best left tackle for several years in the NFL for the Dallas Cowboys. And it just went on and on. Central State had a quarterback named Henderson Mosley, who to this day has as good an arm as I have ever watched throw a football around. So just a prohibitive favorite. I want to say they had beaten Lane out of Tennessee 101-0 that year, and Lane walked off the field maybe still in the third quarter. They said, we're done. This is too much. So got sent up there. Central State loaded for bear against Kenneth Tyson, and that was the rabbit trail I chased here to get back to. Alvin Thomas had a couple of huge runs in that game as Central State went after Tyson with all they had, and Thomas hit that. He was the dive on the veer option, and before Central State knew what was going on, he was behind the secondary and headed to a couple of huge touchdowns. And tight game all the way to the end. I think Carson-Newman was up by a touchdown late, and I'll never forget Central State was not out of it. I said they had the quarterback with a huge arm, and they threw kind of a desperation pass at the end. And Mike Schlechter, who at least at that point was the school's all-time interception leader, picked one off. And he kind of headed toward midfield where Coach Sparks and everybody and people were celebrating on the sideline. And as he was headed with the ball, kind of going out of bounds and ready to celebrate, Central State all stopped. All their players stopped. Well, Schlechter looked around and he said, heck, this is a freebie, and took off and went to the end zone. And I recall that the Central State players, finally, they were chasing and they were spiking their helmets, and they were not happy about those final few points of the game, thanks to Mike Schlechter.
We've talked a lot about the offense, but you bring up Schlechter. Still is the all-time leader in picks at Carson-Newman, but some great defenders from that era as well. You brought up Joe Fishback earlier. You brought up David Poole, Leroy Mincy, mauled people up front on some of those teams. What sticks out to you from those days about Carson-Newman's defense?
Well, I had really tried to spend a lot of time learning football. Again, my career path was to be in the major leagues, calling games for the Detroit Tigers within a few years. And so I realized right away that I needed help if I were to have any chance to do a decent broadcast, let alone one that was worthy of a fan base that was used to listening to Stan and doing a superlative job. And so I knew I'd better get to work. And again, I leaned heavily on Stan to learn how to prepare and what the radio guy needed to know and how to be ready to call a game, fill out spotter charts and all that kind of thing. Again, I was working from scratch, but even more so, I needed to learn about football. I have, to this day, never put pads on in my life. I was a baseball guy. And so Coach Sparks, I just asked him, I said, well, this guy is he's the one who knows. And I said, how do I learn to do something about this? And he said, go talk to Coach Mike Turner, who was the offensive coordinator, offensive line coach. And the first thing, he said, the first thing you need to learn about is the veer offense, because that's, what we're known for, we're built upon. It's different. And so Coach Turner can give you some ideas. Well, Coach Turner had a book about the veer option, and said, and I want to say written by Homer Rice, maybe, kind of the father of it, and said, read this. And at that point, he didn't know me from anybody else, but I went back and read the book and studied it. And so he gave me a little bit of a quiz, just what'd you think of this? And I had the answers. And I think that showed him that I was serious enough about it. Coach Turner invited me to, I think it was on, he said Tuesdays would be a good day, that he kind of had everything in his mind at that point, the game plan for the week, and was at that juncture tweaking it after a couple of days of practice. He said, after everybody else is gone, spend the evening in my office watching video. And you're welcome to come in and sit with me, and, I'll point some things out to you. So I did that every day, every week. And then started talking with Coach Deaton, getting over to the defense. Jim Deaton invited, he said, well, the way you can probably pick up the defense most quickly is, now I want to say it was Mondays, which would make sense. Said on Mondays, come in before practice and watch film with the team, with the defense, and we're going to go back over their mistakes and stuff from the previous game. And he said, that's probably where you can get up to speed the most quickly. So learned about that. And that secondary, you mentioned Schlechter, Fishback, David Poole, and Sammy Dixon was the other one. And then it was a senior-laden team. And after that, they brought in Clayton Holmes the next year as a junior college transfer, who ended up in the NFL as well. So that secondary jumped out. But all across, I mean, you don't win all those games and all those championships without playing great defense. And so I learned about the five-man front. And Leroy Mincy, a name you mentioned there, was that was just kind of crazy. Another Knoxville guy, Kevin Catlett, came along and made a lot of plays at linebacker. A guy who was above and beyond his physical talent just by being smart and working and watching video and that kind of thing. So those were just some superlative teams, and I owe much in my whole career to Mike Turner and Jim Deaton for getting me up to speed, because, again, that wasn't my plan, but it was in the plans. And so I was served well by that to then ultimately get a job calling football games here at Marshall.
You think about the relationship with Turner, Deaton, and Sparks, and certainly it feels uncommon at times. I remember Ken, one of my first years here, is driving around the practice field in a golf cart, tells me, get in, hands me a peach, and asks me what I think of the quarterback situation. I'm like, you've won 300-plus games. I shouldn't be weighing in on this. I'll happily sit with you and eat the peach, but you don't need my opinion here. How welcome did they make you feel in that regard as a fresh-faced kid new to the industry?
It was totally welcome, number one. And again, it was them, and that was huge, but it was everyone. And I think you go to the vision of, Ken Sparks was at that time still the athletic director as well as the coach, although shortly thereafter he said it's getting to be too much to do both jobs well. And so he dropped away from being the athletic director. David Barger became the athletic director. His vision, ultimately the vision goes to the top, and that was Dr. Cordell Maddox. And they knew and understood the mission of Carson-Newman could be reached more fully through media. And so you had at that time, there was the AX network, National Satellite Network, and LCNC, the campus TV outlook. You had the on the cable system and that sort of thing. And so all of these things were viewed as important. And so that vision, I think, just kind of flowed through the entire organization. And so Coach Sparks knew how much that helped recruiting. You could watch their games on television. And we had, at that time, several stations on a radio network, which was pretty much unheard of in the NAIA. And so all of those things played into it. And so it was, number one, the people were good people who wanted to make an impact in the lives of everyone they ran into. So this new kid wanting to become a radio guy was just another one on that list. But then the idea of how much that Carson-Newman's message could be enhanced by whatever the media available at the time was a big part of that too, I believe.
If you go back, we did a digitization project here over the last summer, archiving and making available on the website media guides from as far back as 61. But you go back to those late 80s, early 90s, and even into the Jim Freeman and Bobby Rader era of play-by-play. There were radio broadcasts of Carson-Newman softball and Carson-Newman baseball and obviously men's and women's basketball. Pretty much if there was a sport here at that time, it was going to be broadcast, maybe not a full season, but it was getting some airtime. How instrumental was that to your formative years?
Very much so. And so when I first got there in 1987, I talked about Stan working the games, but Stan his full-time job was as the sports director at TV station in Knoxville, and he kind of did the games on the side. A year later, and this goes back to the changes with Coach Sparks dropping away from the AD duties, David Barger moving up to that, and that vision was to then keep building upon what we were doing on the media side of things. So Stan was hired back to Carson-Newman on a full-time basis. I became a school employee working in the athletic department, taking on a lot of the sports information duties, the promotion, and taking all the maintenance of all the statistics and that kind of thing that so much about it at this point. But and so we really attacked and built the radio network even more. I think we had up to 8 stations.
That sounds
throughout
right.
East Tennessee carrying the games at one point. So that was kind of unheard of. And then back to my baseball roots, I want to say that was the first time we didn't do a full baseball schedule, but we did a majority of the games, and that was kind of my baby. And so we wanted to go with it, and we had a lot of duties. It's a lot of things need to be taken care of. But again, with Stan and me, both of us loved radio play-by-play broadcasts, so that became a focus. And yeah, you mentioned some of those names, and Jim Freeman, who at that time lived in La Follette and wanted to be involved, and he ended up going on to become the play-by-play guy at Miami of Ohio and then at Tulane University. And Stan came to Marshall and now is a legend at Wake Forest. He's been there for a quarter century. And so, we are pretty proud of the fact. And then he came after I departed following the 91 season, but Rod Bramlett was involved in the broadcast and died tragically in an automobile accident a couple of years ago after a great career calling games at Auburn. So Carson-Newman begat many pretty successful radio careers.
Bramlett, we should mention too, was the studio guy.
Yes,
he wasn't
Jim
the play.
Was
yeah.
When my last year, Stan was the play-by-play guy. Unless I was doing that, because he was doing TV, I was primarily the color analyst, and then Jim was the studio guy. And 3 guys who ended up before too many years being play-by-play guys at the Division I level.
You look at those late 80s runs, and you brought up the Cameron game a little bit earlier, and the disappointment following that one, a 30-2 loss. How did that galvanize the team, did you feel, for the next 2 seasons?
Well, it kind of set all their jaws, and that didn't fly well. That was a crazy game. In fact, of all the great things that happened that year, there were 2 losses where Carson-Newman scored 2 points. One was against Catawba, a 2-0 loss to the Indians in just horrendous weather. And a punt snap got loose, and a guy named Keith Henry blocked the punt for Catawba through the end zone, and the 2 points stood up. I know Coach Sparks was really upset with himself after that game. Carson-Newman late had the ball down inside the 5-yard line and had Luis Reves, a very good kicker, but it was pouring. And Coach said, I like our chances better on 4th down and goal from the 1 or the 2 or something like that of handing it off and getting into the end zone than I like a snap and a hold and a kick. And so I don't think he ever did forgive himself for passing up a chance at a 3-2 win. And obviously Catawba stuffed the play on 4th down, and it ended up being a 2-0 game. So that game, 2 points, and you lost the game. And then in the championship game, only scored 2 points. And again, horrible weather. It poured all game long. You talk about one that just felt like was meant to be. Played into a howling wind. I remember the first punt of the game by Cameron won the toss and chose the wind. It was that bad, and the rain, and so had to punt the ball, and punt took off, went out about 20 yards, and then came back and landed behind the line of scrimmage. That was how strong the wind was. And then at the quarter break, you flip ends, and the wind turned around 180 degrees. And Carson-Newman played into the wind the entire first half and just never could get anything going offensively. And then at the in the final few minutes of the game, 30-2, the score, the sun came out. And they were celebrating there in Lawton, Oklahoma. So that was a tough day. But, yes, I think it did steal the kind of minds of all the Carson-Newman folks that we and players as much as anything that we don't want that to happen. And so a newly renewed spirit to get back and try to get another championship ring next year, and nothing stood in the way that year.
It certainly doesn't hurt that Robert Thomas and Robert Hardy arrive on the scene in the backfield either. I mean, Robert Thomas's secretariat after viewing him go into the Hall of Fame last year.
You end up with a team that has lost Kenneth Tyson and Alvin Thomas. And Vernon Turner's back, and you have a solid guy there. Didn't know how good, but and again, Vernon was kind of an undersized guy, but ended up in the NFL and had a solid career there, a kick returner, and a guy who, even though he was a running back, could catch some passes, and multi-skilled guy. And a guy who had been a quarterback in high school, so had a good mind for it. And then you add Robert Thomas, and the running game didn't miss a beat. The team kept on going, and you end up in the championship game against Adams State, which had put up gaudy numbers all year long, had a quarterback, I believe, named Bobby Size, who just threw the ball all over the place. And so that was all the buildup. The championship game was there at Burt Carr Stadium, and everybody talking about the Carson-Newman run game and the Adams State passing game. And, well, the opening kickoff was a touchback, and first play from scrimmage, Vernon Turner took it 80 yards for a touchdown, and Carson-Newman was off to a 59-21 win, something like that.
Close.
It was not a close game.
56-21. Close. We'll give you one for getting every other piece.
I gave Rick Wetzel an extra field goal.
I don't see that in the box score, Steve. I don't see that in the box score.
And then crazy thing, the next year, the first play from scrimmage was a 77-yard touchdown run for Robert Hardy against Emporia State. That one was crazy. Both of those games had really cold weather. Game day for the Adams State game. But then the next year, there was a big snowfall, probably Thursday of that week.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Emporia State came in, and they came in a couple of days early for the championship game. And, all these guys, the Midwestern corn-fed boys who tried to Carson-Newman had a practice time, and then they had to get off the field for Emporia State to come in. And all those Emporia State linemen took off their shirts, and they're throwing snowballs and out there and trying to play the mind games. And I remember all the Carson-Newman guys, instead of being intimidated by that, kind of shook their head and said, "Yeah, those guys are nuts. Let's go warm up and get ready to whip them." And so that's the way it played out. Leon Lett ended up with a long career for the Dallas Cowboys, was an offensive lineman for Emporia State, ended up on the defensive line in the NFL. I remember, though, seeing him and saying, wow, that's one of those guys I used to watch play in the SEC.
Obviously, tons of football memories. How much did you travel outside of football, basketball, baseball, softball around that time? That's something that we've never really talked about much.
Quite a lot. And when Stan came back as a full-time employee of Carson-Newman, we kind of divided up. And at that point, the SAC 8 played double headers. So you have the women's game and then the men's game, same place. So we just divided up. I was the play-by-play guy for the women's game. Stan did color, and we swapped roles for the men's games. And so we were on the road all through basketball season with that. And then, again, my love of baseball was still there. And so did a lot of that. But at that, and the baseball team was very good. Coach Rundles had it rolling at that point. And so they were always in contention for the conference crown. We hosted, I think, the very first South Atlantic Conference baseball tournament when that league became a comprehensive all-sports league. In the early years, it was a football gathering only, but became the all-sports conference and hosted the baseball tournament. And same thing, hosted softball tournaments. Softball was becoming a nationally prominent program at that point. And so especially later in the season, we were hosting conference and regional tournaments, and even one year, and my last year there, 1991, advancing to the national tournament in Columbia, Missouri. So kind of traveled with somebody all the way to the very end of the sports year. So, and again, that was a blast. I was a young guy and liked to go on the road and see new things. And so those were good times.
Let's focus on softball for a moment. Carol Zachary, now Mitchell, Carol Zachary Mitchell, coaches at Gibbs, not too far down the road, and holds just about every offensive record still to this day. What stuck out to you about her for a sport that might have been was in its nascent stages at that point?
Well, number one, she was so good, and she pitched all the time. It was she'd be out there game one, game two of a doubleheader. If you're playing in the tournament, she'd be pitching multiple games, several days in a row, and was as good and throwing as hard and at the very end of all the action as she was at the start. So, and just was fun to be around, had a great personality, and all that whole team was just a blast. But Carol was, again, winning All-American honors.
Yeah.
You knew a step above the norm, and that was that you were watching something unusual. That was obvious from day one.
What was it about those early? I mean, the program starts in '85. It's due to your work as a sports information director in the late '80s that we have the softball record books that we do. What was your level of appreciation of just how good they were getting in those moments, even though the sport at Carson-Newman was a half a decade old?
Well, and that was the era where many schools were adding softball. The AIAW wasn't in the very distant past. It was fairly recent that the NCAA and NAIA had really put a bigger emphasis on women's athletics. And so many were in sort of the same building stages, especially throughout the South Atlantic Conference and the other schools in the East Tennessee region that we played for the most part for the non-conference games. So that part didn't really feel unusual at all because most of us were in more or less the same boat.
Sure.
But, we knew, and again, this goes to the administration from Dr. Maddox down. We knew we wanted to do it right. We wanted to host that baseball tournament. We wanted to host those softball regionals. And we were told, what do you need to do it as well as we possibly can? So that was the emphasis. And again, we enjoyed the people so much that, as well as anyone, the hours you work if you're going to host an 8-team softball tournament, double elimination tournament. It's from sunrise to well after sunset for 3, 4, 5 days. You get a day of bad weather thrown in there. It strains it even more. So, but we had so much fun with it, and everybody was pulling together. And, when you boil it down, I think back on my time at Carson-Newman, that stands out probably as much as anything and was a teaching experience for me. I went in a few times. Marshall has had some of its guys inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. And this was, and I've on most of those occasions, the inductions have been in the summer. The Hall of Fame now is in Atlanta, Georgia, but for many years it was in South Bend, Indiana. And I would be sent as the Marshall representative to attend some of those ceremonies. And in 2005, Marshall had a wide receiver named Mike Barber inducted. And so I would go up there and was hanging out for, 2 or 3 days around, one of the college football kind of havens there in South Bend, all kinds of Notre Dame stuff around, and then the Hall of Fame itself. And people would, you look over here and there's Ray Guy, and over here there's Jack Tatum. That's just kind of a cool 2 or 3 days. And much of the time, they're kind of wandering around and looking at stuff in the museum. And so you have pretty low-key conversations with people. Well, another rabbit trail there, but to my point, there was an older gentleman kind of sitting there in the lobby of the Hall of Fame building itself one day, and nobody around him, and I was doing nothing at that moment. So I just went down and sat down and started, hey, I'm Steve, up here from Marshall. Who are you? His name was Frosty Westering, and he had been a football coach at Pacific Lutheran, among other places, but that's where he had won some NAI Division II national championships, a guy who'd won 300 football games in his career, but who was as much a philosopher as he was a coach. We got to chatting. Well, he mentioned that he had to go to, when he left, he said, I got to go to, they want me to go to the bookstore and do a book signing. And he had written a book called Make the Big Time Where You Are. And he's if you go to the list of famous American quotations, and I'm going to pull one up here, one of the Frosty's in there several times. Just a motivational speaker. But here, the big time is not a place; it's the state of your heart. It's not something you get; it's something you become. And I went and bought his book, and I couldn't get there when he was signing them. I'm one of those things I meant to do and never did, and he passed away. I wanted to get him to autograph my copy of that book, but that sums up the philosophy. And in my lifetime, the places I've been, that's Carson-Newman to me. Make the big time where you are. And again, the vision of Dr. Maddox and Coach Sparks and David Barger and on made Carson-Newman the big time. And it wasn't being in front of 50,000 or 90,000 fans on a Saturday afternoon. But my goodness, we put everything into it we could to do it as well as we could, to have a positive impact on the players and everybody else. And that everybody else part, like back to Coach Turner and Coach Deaton, spending time teaching me what the split back veer meant, or how you blitz out of a 5-man front package. And that they took the time and spent the time with me, and just one of the things that I learned from. I hope I've been able to kind of pass along that same sort of attitude to people over the years.
It must have rubbed off on me at some point, because I think that's something that we've tried to carry on, at least in terms of the relation with the student athletes, is trying to elevate them onto whatever the next big thing is in their life, because let's face it, college is not the end of the road for most folks. To that point, what are some of your top moments or memories of interacting with the students and student athletes from those times where you felt that, hey, you made a difference in their life?
Well, I don't really know how much that I impacted them. Again, even the players influenced me over the years. I saw just the way they went about the and Carol Zachary, just that she had a good time in college, and but she was serious about it. And when it was time to get down to business, she got down to business as well as anything. All those baseball trips, a lot of those guys, and Coach Rundles and his family leading the way. And another thing that always stood out to me was that there was always a premium placed on family time.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant, that there were wives or husbands and kids hanging around out at practice and around the program. And, Coach Turner had the redheaded family hanging out there. And that has continued to make an impact even to this day. And so that was a big part of it. And, hopefully that there's some people who might every once in a while remember, hey, that other Cotton guy was around, and we had some fun times too. And maybe I'll learn something here and there. But not only within the actual athletic department, but some of the greatest people of my life are Alan and Sherry Sharp. And, they had the land of misfit toys. They brought in all of us who came in and didn't have a family around and, weren't making much money. And they could come and eat dinner at my house every day for the rest of our lives. And I still wouldn't pay them back for all the meals and times that they had me and countless others. And we'd go there and play games. And Sunday after church, it was almost always we head to the Sharps for the rest of the day.
It was a sad day. And granted, I understood it. Obviously, kids, and they're off in college. The thing that has always stuck out to me about Carson-Newman is just how good the pregame meal in the football press box was and is. And it started with the Sharps, and I'm eternally grateful that my wife was willing to pick up that mantle when it came time to for the Sharps to go off and visit their children on most college Saturdays. But Alan and Sherry, I can't miss them too much because Leanda does I can't talk bad about her cooking because it's exceptional. But Alan and Sherry Sharp, the little cookies with the remisces in them, it's worth the media credential for a Carson-Newman football game.
Sherry took care of, and to this day takes care of. There's no way to even add up the numbers of how many people that they've had the positive impact on. But even when we would go on the road games, and they would pack up and go, Sherry and Alan and their daughter Lindsay would show up in Wingate or Presbyterian or wherever we were, and they'd walk up to the press box up through the stands and always hand a packet of M&Ms into Stan and me, make sure we were fortified for the broadcast. You talk about how these impact you might make an impact down the way. Their daughter Lindsay went on to be a collegiate swimmer at James Madison University. Well, when she finished up there, she decided she wanted to get a master's degree. Well, the Sharps, and then Alan and Sherry, and then Lindsay also. What kind of, how do you go about being a graduate assistant and that kind of thing? Because I had gone through that process. And long story short, well, Lindsay came to Marshall, got a graduate assistant here, got a master's degree, met a Marshall guy, married, and so maybe grandkids help me pay back my debt to the Sharps.
It is crazy though that just how small the world can be with some of this stuff.
Again, like at that age, I thought it was dumb luck that I got a job at Carson-Newman, and I think divine appointments is much more the way you need to look at that.
You think back to your time calling games, and the physical structure of things has changed quite a bit. Not just Carson-Newman, but throughout the SAC. And you look back at those old pictures of Bergtar Stadium, and it's just one room. All the way across. How did you deal with, from a technical standpoint, of calling a game in the open air where you've got a TV crew, either in there or across the way in the old Crow's Nest, but also opposing radio crews in the same room. And let's face it, we as broadcasters typically aren't the quietest people.
Yep, I'm as loud as anybody when things get rolling on game day, and it was kind of chaos, and you really felt for the a Derwin Helton from the Morristown Citizen Tribune or Richard Hayworth from the Standard Banner, trying to gather their thoughts and write some coherent sentences, and they've got Cotton and Cotton over here, and the Presbyterian guys over here, all making just all sorts of a racket and the chaos going on. So that was unusual. Boy, what a blessing the new stadium, the new press tower is. That reminds me of back to that Adams State championship game in 1988. The weather was so cold that I want to say, again, you can check me on this. I might be off, but it might have been 5 degrees or something that morning. Well, that old press box not only was there were a huge open air area, the windows were whatever the opposite of insulated is. Everything was drafty, and it was cold in there. Well, you've got a national telecast going on for the championship game. You've got Adams State radio on one end, Carson-Newman radio on the other end. Here I am, year 2 of my career. I'm still pretty excitable. And, the power overload was, we threw a breaker, I think 3 times during the pregame show. Just there was too much going on. And among other things, Dr. Maddox, now it was a separate box. There was a door cutting off the south end where Dr. Maddox had the president's suite. And I looked down there, and I think everyone he had, and it might have seated 20 people in there or so, I might be a little off in that memory. Everyone had brought their little electric space heater to put around there. And so here we are, probably a half hour before the game, and I'm looking around. I'm just flustered at being thrown off the air 3 times already. Back to being loud. I'm sure I was not modulated and quite not as prim and proper as I might have been. And I basically, I don't even remember what I said, but it was, we need to unplug all these space heaters. But I said it in such a manner, apparently. The next thing I know, Dr. Maddox, in his suit, was on his hands and knees, crawling under the table and unplugging everything that was plugged in. And I thought, well, this might be my final broadcast here, but at least it's going to be on the air from this point on. We're not going to throw the breakers anymore. And the next time I saw him the following week, he had a good laugh about that too. So he was gracious in helping out the radio broadcast and everybody else in the press box.
We've blabbered quite a bit, as you and I want to do. But one story I do want you to touch on that I recall you telling me when I first got here, it involved the Carson-Newman softball program. And I guess it boils down to it's a Vicky Kazee Hollifield story. And your travel to St. Louis. Obviously, you're a big baseball guy, so you'll take any major league game that you can get. But you got some major league experience, but it came at a sleep price, I guess.
It was so 91, and this was actually my last event at Carson-Newman before I moved on. The team made it to the national tournament, and it was in Columbia, Missouri. So we flew into St. Louis, and then I think we had 2 15-passenger vans and a car, and went on to Columbia. And, and this goes back to, it's about the people. And I won one game and lost 2, I believe, double elimination tournament. So it was over. So you figure out your flights, and we were flying out of St. Louis at early flight, around 6 a.m., something like that. And and it was going to be the next day. Well, at that point, we'd already been eliminated for about a day. So we'd been in Columbia, and, it's the end of the season. You're disappointed about the way the tournament went. Time to get home. Well, several of the players thought, you know what? can we go to a Cardinals game? So they started asking Coach Kazee, before she was Coach Kazee Hollifield at that point, Vic, can we go to the game instead of spending another night here? It was far enough that you couldn't go to the game and then go back to Columbia to the hotel and then be back at the airport at 6 o'clock. And Vicky said, ladies, we don't have enough money. I mean, we've gone to all these extra tournaments and, that's an expense, and we can't get more hotel rooms because we're already paying for these. We can't get more in St. Louis. And they just kept on. Well, what if we just, long story short, she said, all right, if you can convince Steve to drive one van to St. Louis, take you to the game, and then you just have to entertain yourselves for the night, and we'll meet you at the airport. And so they talked me into it, and it wasn't that hard to talk me into it. Well, we had a blast. Went to the ball game at Old Busch Stadium, then went down to the Riverwalk, and at that point, things close up around 11 o'clock. So we went to a Denny's and sat there for about 3 hours, and finally we said, all right, it's time. We just need, and people are dead tired at that point. You've been to the tournament. You're not getting a whole lot of really good sleep anyway the entire week. And so people at that point people were falling asleep at the table at Denny's. I said, all right, we got to get out of here. Let's go to the airport. Well, obviously, prior to 9/11, airports were very different places. We got there, and there were quite a few homeless people who found shelter for the night in the St. Louis airport. And so all the girls, they had their stuff. So we had all the bags, which, they checked them in. We were able to check in and get rid of most of the luggage, but they had their handbags and all this, and they were terrified that they would fall asleep and someone would pick their pockets or, run off with the purse. So anyway, our solution to that was that I sat in the middle, and they all gave me their purse. So my arms are full of purses, and I'm hugging them all. And then the girls surrounded me in the chairs, and then even would lie down on the floor a couple of deep. So, we had a half dozen, 8 or 9 players and me, and I'm loaded down with that many purses, and nobody got to me. Nobody was able to steal any purses or anything like that. And the rest of the team showed up and wondered what in the world was going on with that crazy outfit right there. But that was my big finale at Carson-Newman. And again, I do not remember details of any of those games, but thinking back to Coach Kazee Hollifield and Brandy Harden and Carol Zachary and Christy Luttrell and Sammy Hatcher and Stacy Skeen and Susie, it's the people you remember. And as tired as we were and as worn out as we were, that is my memory of that trip and that tournament.
Oh, Cotton, that's a good stopping point. We've reminisced a good amount. Greatly appreciate you taking some time out of your pre-Appalachian State preparations to join us for a Mossy Creek conversation.
Well, as always, it's a good time, and I get a big smile on my face whenever I think about it, and it's always good to reminisce, Gav.
Steve, thank you. That is former Carson-Newman voice and current voice of the Thundering Herd, Steve Cotton. I'm Adam Cavalier. This has been another Mossy Creek Conversation. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.